All right, this is our next episode of True Wrestling Fan Discussions, continuing our Dark Side of the Ring review series. This is going to be breaking the cycle, the Graham Dynasty. I'm your host, Mike.
Frank, man, let's get into this. I mean, we're going to say this week in and week out. This is a horrible, tragic story.
Yeah,
But then again, if you're on Dark Side of the Ring, obviously,
chances are,
it,
yes,
it's going to be.
fortunately, but
And this is sad because the legacy that this family leaves behind in the territories and everything is just unbelievable. How his father he knew the business. He had a territory that was a gold mine in Florida,
yeah.
and just a little thing of of depression that running in the family, man. Who knew? But let's go ahead and get into it. Like I had said, the Graham family was legendary in Florida. We'll get into that in a little bit. They started off interviewing Nicole Gossett, which is Mike Graham's daughter,
Hmm.
and what this poor girl had to endure later on. We'll get to that. She was talking about how every Sunday they would have matches, in their hometown, and that the wrestlers would sometimes spend the night at the house, so you didn't know who was coming and going. She mentioned Magnum TA would be sleeping on the
Yeah.
couch. She mentioned Andre the Giant scared the crap
Just
out of
scared of
her.
him.
I love that one. I was like, yeah, I could see that. Um, Everybody in that timeline wanted to be on the roster in Florida. I was like, not Florida Championship Wrestling.
Mhm.
I guess maybe that's what it was
Florida.
called. But yeah, Jim Cornette was on this show, like he's on most shows. He was talking about how Eddie made people believe that he was the toughest man in Florida. Um, Even Kevin Sullivan was on the show. He
Hmm.
talked about how he worked with the Grahams. He said that Eddie was, and I quote, the genius of the business. And from what I've seen on this and what I remember from his reputation, he was. Dottie Curtis was another person that they had interviewed. This was a friend of the family, the wife
Yeah,
of
she was.
Don Curtis. They met Eddie in '52, and he asked them to come promote with him in Jacksonville. So that to start it there.
Yeah. Florida
Um,
was a big hotbed for
oh
wrestling
yeah,
back in the
definitely
day. The Tampa area, like around there, was
Tampa, Jacksonville,
Tampa.
Oakley.
Yeah.
And Graham was also, he had the gift of gab on the microphone,
Hmm.
which is definitely a quality that you need, in professional wrestling, and he owned it. He did the storyline, even though they weren't brothers, to come with him, and the Graham brothers were actually born in 1958, and created at Madison Square Garden of all places. And by then, in '58 and '59, they talked about how they were making six figures in the business, and back then, man, that's unheard of,
Yeah, definitely.
especially in '58, '59.
Hmm.
I mean, you talk about six figures, which would be millions of dollars today.
Yeah, easily.
But the problem with Jerry Graham, unfortunately, was he had an alternate side to him, which was pretty much an alcoholic, and he was mentally ill, unfortunately. I love this, and I was laughing when Cornette said this. He would go into a biker bar and start a fight. He would just go up to somebody and go, "Hi, my name's Balls. Got any?"
Yeah, you got it. Yeah,
Oh my
that's
God, that
wild.
was that was hilarious. That's the first time Cornette said something that I actually enjoyed. Um, the story about the hospital with his mother was also like weird because he threatens the doctor and says, "If my mother doesn't come out of this, he pretty much threatened his life." His mother obviously died in the hospital. He comes back with shotguns, knives, just oh my God. He grabs her, the gurney. He puts his mom over his shoulder, and he just says, "I just want to bury my mother." I'm like, this is insane. This story.
That's a pretty wild story.
Yeah. Um, After the hospital incident with Jerry Graham and his mom and that whole thing, Eddie decided to part ways with Jerry Graham.
Because he was
Didn't
just
he
it was
was he
too
was he
wild.
was out of
It
it.
was too
Yeah,
out of control. It's ironic because he took his name. He took his name, the Graham name, because not that wasn't his real name. He was going by another name. Um,
yeah.
and then he said, "See ya." Well, you know,
Well, I think after that point, you got to look and go, yeah, I'm
yeah, this
out. I
guy's yeah,
I, I got to take the high road on this girl,
yeah, for sure. All right,
unfortunately. Um, After all of this, Eddie had um, they moved the fam- he moved the family to Florida in 1960. Um, became a huge success wrestling there, like we had said. B. Brian Blair was also on the show who worked for them at the time. Actually worked with both. B. Brian Blair had said he had Eddie brought him into the. Eddie bought the territory. Excuse me, to take it to a huge in the next level that he thought he could be. Um, the funny thing about Eddie Graham, despite most people, is he actually had a good working relationship with both Vince McMahon and his father. Where I believe B. Brian Blair had some things to say about Vince later on in this,
Yeah,
quote unquote, stealing the talent. I don't think B.
pretty
Brian
much.
Blair ever liked him since the last time he was on a dark side of the ring.
I mean, he pretty much did, man. That's what he did. He pillaged the talent from the other territories and
I hate to use
took
that
everything
word, but yeah,
national.
you're right. He did. He seized the moment, and he did.
For those that don't
It's
know, this guy was one of the Killer Bees,
yes,
Brian Blair.
along with
Great
Jumping Jim
wrestler.
Brunzell.
Hmm.
Mhm. So the NW. What's funny is also with Eddie when it came to Eddie Graham is that the NWA, who was made up of all promotional leaders,
Hmm.
they never made a decision without talking to him first. That was that's pretty impressive. That they rely on his input before they go any further. I mean, like they said, he was a wrestling genius. So um, this is the other part of it that I couldn't believe when they were talking about it. How he would actually instruct wrestlers to break bones. Um, pretty much, I remember talking to Kevin Sullivan, and he said if that guy doesn't come back here bleeding, you're through. I mean that
That
right
was
there is
crazy.
insane.
That was wild.
I believe he wanted to keep the integrity of its people believing that it was real. I can understand the
Yeah,
bleeding part of it, but I
yeah.
mean the breaking bones to me that's a little over the edge. But that's what the guy did. They also they talked about how Eddie was a go getter and he had a relentless drive and a passion for the business. He wanted to elevate the perception of wrestling back then. Politicians kissed his ass, which I thought was funny because he was involved. He was not only in the business, but he also involved in things outside of
Hmm.
the wrestling business, which they didn't get into too much, other than saying that he was in some shady. He was in business with some shady
Right,
characters.
right.
So they pretty, in Florida, they said he was involved in everything. He never wanted to fail. Um, but his one problem was alcohol. That was his biggest problem. And I remember they talked about a story on here that he got drunk, went out on his boat. Mike, who was 10 years old at the time, didn't want to see his father hurt himself, so he rode his bike over to a bridge that his father would have passed under. His idea was to jump on the boat and make sure his father didn't do it. His mom said, "Thank God he missed the boat because he would have probably missed it completely and drowned."
Yeah.
Luckily, nothing happened to his father at that point. Because Mike idolized his father, and
Hmm.
unfortunately, with what happens later on, you can tell it took a huge effect on him. Um, he put high expectations on his son, which Mike believed that he couldn't live up to, and that's one of the things that he felt ashamed about. That he wasn't what his father wanted him to be, or he thought he wasn't what
Right, right,
his
yeah.
father wanted to be. They took from a 2010 interview with Mike Graham. He said his dad gave him all the tools, when he joined the wrestling business, taught him everything he needed to know. What's funny is Mike Graham, he wasn't intimidated by anybody's size. Mike Graham wasn't a big guy. He was, medium sized build for the business back then, which back then those type of guys weren't pushed as much as
No.
it is now. Sullivan had mentioned that he had teamed with Mike Graham in the past, but he also had fought against him. In 1980, Mike joined his father in Florida. Excuse
Hmm.
me. The one thing I don't know if this affected Mike in any way, but Dusty was like a surrogate son
Yeah.
to Eddie. He took him under his wing, molded him in the business, but he was like his adopted son almost.
Yeah, I kind of
Uh,
felt bad for Mike because you're in your father's shadow. You're trying to impress him. He was also a smaller stature.
yeah,
He wasn't the biggest guy in the world. I mean, his dad wasn't huge either. I think his dad, they said he was like 5'10" and a half, right?
yeah,
Mike was even smaller than that in a business full of monsters.
yeah. Back at the time, yeah,
So, but he made the
yeah.
best of it, you know.
I mean, I can only imagine what the guy was thinking. You know, you're trying to you gain your father's respect
Hmm.
in the business, and
Yeah.
he's pouring it all out on somebody else. It's got to be rough on him. In his 50s now, Eddie had retired from the business, which that was probably one of the downfalls because now it was pretty much like, okay, what do I do now? And
Hmm.
I'm not relevant. Case in point to one of the stories they brought up is, you know, they went to a restaurant and it's like nobody recognized him, nobody knew who he was. He didn't feel relevant anymore,
Yeah.
and that was one of the things that was weighing heavily on him. But at the time of his retirement, he was in business with, you know, shady characters. He was also drinking on pills. I mean, it was just a downward spiral for him at this point. Um, Another story they had, and this I couldn't believe. You know, he would always go to his local store, you know, pick up a cheap bottle of wine, and he would what was it that he signed at the bottom of the check? Peace of mind.
Okay.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
Um, and one night this place wasn't open. So he goes and runs into the field, starting to scramble around any empty bottles that there are. And he's sitting there, drinking whatever's left out of
Yeah.
these bottles.
That's sad.
If this isn't rock bottom,
Yeah.
he's about to hit it. Especially when, you know, for his birthday, you know, his granddaughter asked him, "So what do you want for your birthday?" And he said, "I got it. You know, I got 55 years."
Yeah. She didn't know what that meant at first.
Exactly, until they found out the next day what happened. And Mike is at a 49ers game
Right.
and gets paged to find out that his father shot himself and commit suicide. And he went to the hospital, and after discussing everything with the doctor and his mom, they
Yeah.
had to pull the plug.
Oh yeah.
On January 21st, 1985, his father took his life. And at this point now, this is the third in the family because they don't mention it until the end
Right
that
at the very end. Yeah.
Eddie's father and his uncle had done the
Yeah.
same thing as
They got
well.
committed suicide as well. Yeah.
So at this point now, he, you know, and they said that he didn't let people know that he was depressed. He always hid this stuff from everybody. You know, they kind of knew now that he was not as strong as he was trying to let on that he
Hmm.
was. He was putting on a facade, unfortunately. And now, you know, you know, at this point now they talked about the territories drying up in 1984, what Vince McMahon was doing. At that point, also Dusty had left Florida. He had joined Jim Crockett Promotions. Um, so Mike, you know, Mike is now leading Florida, and he's pretty much leading the Titanic at this
Yeah.
point.
Writing's on the wall.
And yeah, and I mean they even used the storyline of his father's death with the Fabulous Freebirds, and the fans knew this was a desperation. Like they saw it
Hmm.
and like, oh come on, really? You're gonna do this? Insult our intelligence? I mean, he's pretty much trying anything. I mean, his father was an icon running Florida champion, you know,
Hmm.
Florida territory. Now Mike Graham's trying to run in his father's footsteps, and he can't. He's just falling. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's not. I don't think it's his fault. I think it's because of everything that's happening in the business.
Yeah.
You
The business
know?
is changing. It's just changing.
And unfortunately, he's there at the time
Yeah.
that it's happening. Could his father have successfully steered the ship through this? I don't know.
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so
Yeah, I
either.
don't think
I think Vince
it was over. Yeah.
it would have
Vince was
gone Vince's
coming.
way.
Vince was coming. Yeah.
The higher power,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Um, Now, Graham was pretty much now on the verge of losing the family wrestling empire, and 2 years later, it did happen. The doors finally closed. And so at 40 years old now, he signs with WCW. They
Hmm.
showed him in a tag team match with
Yeah.
Jushin Thunder Liger, DDP, Bill Kazmaier. I've seen a few of his matches. He was on a couple of the
Yeah.
pay-per-views.
No, I think we covered him too. I think, and I think
Well,
you probably have.
his most famous line that he will forever be remembered for.
Broke 6,000 guitars, never drew a dime. Yeah, in regards to Jeff Jarrett,
Exactly.
that was Mike Graham who coined that phrase,
And the
and I
way
use it all the time.
and the way he said it on the documentary,
Yeah,
broke 6,000 guitars,
never
never
drew it.
drew a
Yeah,
dime.
yeah, I'll never forget that,
Love
man. Rest in
that
peace, Mike.
exactly,
Yeah.
man. I love it. And they were talking about as far as Mike goes, he used to love racing boats. He was
Hmm.
in various competitions. He had a bunch of them.
He was a road agent in WCW. He was,
Yeah.
he was an agent with them after he finished up wrestling. He was still working for them.
And he got his first tattoo when he was 40. It was a flaming skull on his leg, and underneath it was wrote "Peace of Mind," which is pretty much the, I don't know if you want to say the jinx phrase for the family,
Yeah.
but and of course the daughter got one. She wants to get one just written out because she's the cycle's broken with her. The reason why I say that, and I'm gonna get to that in a second, is that Mike Graham's son, Stephen, had committed suicide
Yeah.
on December 14, 2010. And same way as his grandfather, it was a shotgun, shot himself. And the one thing I can honestly say being a parent is you never want to outlive your child. It's got to be, for him, it's got to be the most heart-wrenching thing to experience. And he told his daughter, "You're lucky you found him and not
Hmm.
me, because then you'd be burying the both of us."
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
honestly, I would probably tell my daughter the same thing because you just don't want to experience that. And then the fact that he was so close to his father and he's still dealing with the loss of his father, now the
Yeah.
loss of his son, it's just amazing. And right before Mike Graham took his life, he had suffered business. The one thing they didn't talk about in here is that he had suffered business misfortunes as well prior to his death. He was a restaurant owner and it closed in 2011, a year before he took his life. And also, he lost a ton. He was involved with his wife in real estate. And when the recession hit, he got killed on that too. So it's like the dark clouds over this poor man.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, on October 19, 2012, Mike Graham took his own life the same way as his son and his father. And this was now the fifth Graham family member that has done this. And
The
I mean,
daughter
I
said
got yeah.
the daughter said she didn't know why, right? I don't think he didn't leave a note or anything like that, right? Did I miss that? I don't think
No,
I know.
he put on his son's well the fact of he couldn't bear his son was he couldn't bear he couldn't, if I can get the words out here, it was hard for him to live with what happened with his son. It was hurting him day in and day out. Again, also with his father, he put his son's boots on the day he did it, and so the grief and everything finally got to him. And plus, she had said that the family was suffering from depression, and that it finally just he took his life that
Yeah.
day. He couldn't handle the pain anymore.
Yeah, I think she said she felt like the fact that other people had done it in the family kind of made them feel like, well, this is an option. Like
Yeah.
when times got hard, when they got really depressed and everything, they felt like, well, my uncle did it or my grandfather did it, so
And remember, back then, this was not something they tested for, they looked for. Depression was a sign of weakness, back then with a lot of people, so that they tried to hide it and consume it, and eventually
mhm.
it consumed them.
Tragic.
So this really was, and I'm speechless. Just everything that he went through, it's just like unbelievable. And again, you wouldn't be on Dark Side of the Ring if it wasn't a tragic story to tell.
Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, it was I thought it was a good episode. It's
It
one of
was
those,
very informative.
yeah. But at least the daughter seems to be doing well, and you
Yeah, I
know.
just wouldn't get that tattoo. That's just me. That's just
Yeah,
peace of mind seems to be the final
yeah,
nail in your acceptance of doing whatever it is you're going to do.
yeah. All right. Well, I think next week is Doink, right?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Th-
I can't wait. I'm actually curious to see this one. I
yeah.
mean,
This is gonna be
what's so,
interesting.
20 some odd doinks that we've had,
Yeah.
but they're
This is
focusing
Matt Bourne,
on
right?
one. I
Bourne,
believe
right?
so. I believe
Bourne.
so.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to this one. I
Yeah.
want to see what they've uncovered with
Yeah.
him.
Definitely. All right. Well, you guys make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. Let us know what you think, and we'll see you guys soon.
Take care.